Good morning, everybody. Rob Bonta, California Attorney General here. Thank you for joining us today. As I'm sure you've been closely following, in the early hours of Sunday morning, President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth unlawfully federalized 2,000 California National Guard troops for 60 days with no indication as to when they intend to stand down. They did so without authorization from Governor Newsom and against the wishes of local law enforcement who were on the ground, actively assessing and responding to the situation in Los Angeles in real time. A situation that didn't warrant the National Guard. In fact, by this time, the first few hundred troops arrived on Sunday. By the time the first few hundred troops arrived on Sunday, the protests had mostly dissipated and streets were mostly quiet and calm. Since Trump announced his plan to deploy troops, the situation on the ground has escalated quickly, with unrest growing overnight, causing highways to close and putting people in danger. This wasn't the case on Saturday or Sunday morning. This was not inevitable. We'll never know what might have been had the president left our state and local authorities to continue the important work they were already doing and were more than capable of doing. What we do know is that what we saw yesterday happened after the president's unnecessary, counterproductive, and, most importantly, unlawful order. An order that abused the federal government's authority and violated the 10th Amendment and federal law. An order that skipped over multiple rational, common sense, strategic steps that should have been deployed to quell unrest and prevent escalation. As a result, I, in partnership with Governor Gavin Newsom, are suing President Trump and asking the court to set aside the president's unlawful action federalizing the California National Guard. With this order, Trump and Hegseth ignored law enforcement's expertise and guidance and trampled over our state's, California's, sovereignty. They unlawfully invoked a law that's intended to prevent an invasion by a foreign nation or a rebellion, or local and state law enforcement make it so that the laws of the United States cannot be executed. Those are the only three triggers that would provide for the invocation of the National Guard, and none of them were present here. A law that's only been used on its own once before in modern history, when 55 years ago, when President Nixon ordered the National Guard to deliver mail during the Postal Service strike. The movement of the mail through the U.S. Postal Service was down. It was not happening. The laws could not be executed without the federal government calling in the National Guard. That's an example of the only other time ever that this law was used to invoke the calling in of the National Guard by the federal government. This is a law that requires the governor's consent to activate the National Guard. This is the first time since 1965 that a president has activated the National Guard without a request from the state's governor. And the governor of California knows how to call in the National Guard if and when it's needed. He did it with the LA fires. He did it in the summer of 2020 with some of the protests in California. So this is something that is within Governor Newsom's sovereignty, and he did not authorize the use of the National Guard here, did not call for it. Yesterday afternoon, Governor Newsom actually sent a letter to Mr. Hegseth requesting that the secretary rescind the unlawful deployment of troops and return them to the governor's command. The request was ignored. We don't take lightly to the president abusing his authority and unlawfully mobilizing California National Guard troops. Service members who work hard day and night to protect our state. They're tackling fentanyl at the border. They're tackling wildfires and preparing for the next one. They train and they prepare so they're ready if they're called to war. They work to keep our border secure. prevent fentanyl from infiltrating our neighborhoods, poisoning our people, and killing our communities. They stand ready to move in at a moment's notice to respond to a natural disaster. Activating these troops for protests that local law enforcement had confirmed at the time were under control is deeply unfair and disrespectful of their service and sacrifice. It pulls them away from critical work that needs and requires their immediate attention. If the situation had necessitated support from the National Guard at the time, Governor Newsom would have swiftly deployed them. Something he's already done during his time in office, again, including as recently as this January, a few months ago, when he called service members to help respond to the wildfires in Southern California. National Guard weren't needed in LA yesterday, and sending them in only escalated the situation and contributed to the developments we saw overnight. I was in communication with local law enforcement this weekend, who confirmed that they had what they needed to control the protests in Paramount. If local law enforcement did decide they needed further support, the first rational step would be to call upon other nearby agencies, call in mutual aid through strong strategic protocols we have in place in the state already. There's a progression here. If you can handle it internally, the situation on the ground, which over the weekend, the LA Sheriff's Department and LA Police Department were fully capable of, then you do so. If you need additional support, you call for mutual aid. They didn't need any mutual aid over the weekend. California local law enforcement, over the weekend before the president issued the order calling in the National Guard. California local law enforcement are prepared. They're trained and they're resourced to handle situations exactly like this. This is what they do. They know how to do their jobs and know when to call in backup, including the National Guard, if it is necessary, if it is fit to do so. That was not the case on Sunday. Trump and Hegseth jumped from 0 to 60, bypassing law enforcement expertise and evaluation. They threw caution to the wind and sidelined strategy in an unnecessary and inflammatory escalation that only further spurred unrest. Let's be very clear, there was no risk of rebellion, no threat of foreign invasion, no inability for the federal government to enforce federal laws. It's no accident that the right to peaceful protest is in the First Amendment. It's because peaceful protest is a cornerstone of any healthy democracy. The ability to come together in community, call out injustice, speak truth to power, and demand accountability from those in power defines who we are as Americans, defines our history, defines what we stand for as a nation of the people, by the people, for the people. To silence the people is to smother our democracy. To any who are outraged with the conduct of President Trump and his administration, who feel moved to stand up and speak out, I urge you to do so peacefully, safely, and lawfully. To any opportunists who see peaceful protests as their moment to create chaos, know that local law enforcement are on the ground, ready to take action in order to protect public safety and protect the right to peaceful protest.